just starting a little video clip. Yes. High tech.
Oh,
yes.
So I think we can
Maybe
start.
we can start, yes?
More or less, we have everyone here, except one or two still get lost.
Oh, yes.
Because we are located in the jungle.
Yes. Yes, you really have to know where to turn off.
Yeah, that's very true. Yes. Okay.
Would you like to say a few words?
Yes. I think it's very honorable for us, everyone here, that to have the Venerable Olande Ananda, which is the monk from Sri Lanka. Originally, this Venerable is from Netherlands, and I think he is living in Sri Lanka for many years.
34 years.
34 years. And this Venerable have been in Bhutan last year, I think in
during the coronation.
Coronation in November, and I also have a very good opportunity and honor to also to host such a session also during that time. And for this visit, this Venerable have been attending the Paro session last week. So from there, and he will extend also his visit for a few more days in Bhutan. So I think it's a good opportunity also again to arrange such a session today. And today I think that the session that what His Venerable will be giving us will be in the three sub-sessions. First will be a teaching on the three delusion, and then link up to Vipassana. And after that we will have some practice on the meditation and Vipassana. And for each, and then we will end up with question and answer. So I think each sub-session will be taking up a bit 30 minutes each. So we will be taking altogether 1.5 hours. And after that, you are all invited for Thai dinner also. So I think that is my introduction. And I think.
Thank you very much, Martini. And good evening, everyone. First, I would like to say a few words about the three kinds of delusions that most people are living under, as long as we are not enlightened, as long as we don't have insight into the reality as it is. And from there we can say, well, the opposite of those illusions, that would be the insights into the three characteristics of existence, which is part and parcel of the insight or vipassana that one gets through the practice of mindfulness, the satipatthana bhavana, or the meditation on the development of mindfulness of body, feelings and mind. So generally speaking, most people seem to think that in this world things are permanent, or as permanent as it can be, or they hope that things are permanent. And whereas the reality is actually that everything is impermanent and changing all the time. Even in science you find that when you really look at matter, for instance, under an electronic microscope, then you start to see the, maybe come a little bit further forward. So when you look at matter under a microscope, a very powerful electronic microscope, you start to see that what we think is matter. Now, for instance, diamonds are forever, they say, right? But even if you look at a diamond under the microscope, you find that there's a lot of space in between the particles. And when you go subatomically, some people can't find the way maybe. And when you then look subatomically, you find that there's actually just energy and not really matter. So that comes very close to what the Buddha says, that the ultimate reality is really empty of matter. So the ultimate reality of matter that is that there's no matter. But then of course we have to look with the Buddha's wisdom also at the different levels of reality. You see, we have this general relative reality that we have to deal with in daily life, where we have concepts and things around us, and this me and mine, yours, and so on. And that is what we call sammutti satya in the Pali language, the relative reality. And then there is the absolute reality, the things as they really are, that is called the paramartha satya, the higher truth. So in that way, we can say that as long as we are deluded, that is not enlightened, we do identify more with that relative reality, and we don't know the other side or the absolute reality yet. So the idea or the aim, in a way, of one of the aims of Vipassana meditation is to get to know that other absolute reality for oneself, not as a concept, but as an experience. And that will actually have a very beneficial effect on our minds, in the sense that it will loosen up these delusions that we have. So to just sum up the three delusions I just mentioned, the first one, that we think things and people and situations are permanent, which they aren't. The other delusion is we also tend to think that there's real happiness in these relative things. And of course there is happiness, there's also unhappiness, but even the happiness that we derive from the worldly things that we can see, hear, smell, taste, touch and think, they are not absolutely giving us the, let's say, lasting happiness or permanent happiness, because they are all conditioned. As long as we see beautiful things, we feel happy. As long as we hear beautiful sounds, we feel happy. And smelling, tasting, touching and thinking, the same for that. But when you really see that that happiness is conditioned by the objects that we perceive, and when that object is gone, that happiness is also gone, and then we try to extend it, so we hope for more. Basically, that is where our greed and our thirst, our craving comes from. Hoping for more pleasant experiences and trying to avoid the unpleasant experience. That is basically what human beings and basically all beings seem to be doing. We want happiness, we try to avoid unhappiness. But we tend to confuse the temporary happiness with, the real happiness with temporary happiness. So we always go for the temporary things, and then we find, oh, is that all? It's gone before you know it. And then we sort of think back with longing, I wish it would be there, or something, I hope I have more of this. And that is where the craving starts to work in our minds. And that is also where the conflict is between what is and what we want. And you cannot always get what you want, but you get what you need. That's what the Beatles said anyway, those days. And that seems to be the law of karma also, that you do get what you need, but you can't always get what you want. So there is a kind of conflict between the wanting and the fact that what is. So that is one thing which we call a cause of dukkha, or unsatisfactoriness, or conflict, or suffering. And then the third delusion is sometimes maybe the most difficult one, that is the delusion that there is a real self, an abiding, unchanging, everlasting core or soul or self in ourselves. Now, as Buddhists, we sort of go proud on saying there's no self in Buddhism. We don't have a self. But some people are very proud and selfish about it with saying that. Now we have to understand what the Buddha said when he mentioned the word anatta in Pali language, which of course is not related to Buddhism but more to Hindi and Sanskrit. Anatta means non-self, or rather not having an eternal, everlasting, unchanging soul in itself. So what did the Buddha mean by that? So atta would be self, anatta is non-self. Now the word atta is used by the Buddha also. He says you yourself are responsible for your actions. You create your own karma. You do good, you do bad, you receive the results of your karma. And in that way there is a self who is doing, who is experiencing, who is intending, and so on, who is thinking, and receiving the good and bad results of previous karma, even from past lives. In that sense, there is a stream of consciousness which continues and has a certain identity of itself. And that is why we say, for instance, when we remember something from when we were very young, that is me. When you see a picture of yourself as a baby, that's me. But that body has completely changed over the years, the mind also has changed, but still there is a line of identity. So that's why we can say that is a relative self. But there's no absolute, unchanging, everlasting core in it. So that is what the Buddha actually denied, that eternal core. And that is why he says, An-Atman. Now in Hinduism, which is sort of the background of the Buddha's time, and even now, Atman is a very major thing in their teachings. They say, well, okay, your body is changing, your feelings are changing, your intentions are changing, your thoughts are changing, the content of your consciousness is changing, but there is something which you really are. That is the Hindu teaching. They say, thou art that, tattvam asi. And if I'm not this, then I hope to be that. And that is also eternal, unchanging, everlasting. It's like God, and I am God. Thou art that. That is in the Hindu view, the kind of philosophy or the view of self. So there's a self with a small self, and there's a self with a capital S. Capital S. But in Buddhism, the Buddha said, no, there is something which is eternal and unconditioned, which we call nirvana, but that is not yourself. That doesn't belong to you. That is just the unconditioned, which we can realize, but you should not identify with it as me, mine, my own, or myself, or my soul. So that is quite a major difference. I think that's the main difference between Hindu teachings and Buddhist teachings. And I think the Buddha actually tried to show that there is no substance or eternal self in all this in order to get rid of our craving and our attachment. Because if we say, I am that, or you are that, then perhaps you start identifying with that very subtle, unconditioned, maybe God or the Absolute, and that in itself could become a reason or a cause for rebirth. Now, of course, we do have this problem in Buddhism, the different schools of Buddhism with different ideas. Huh? Now, in Theravada Buddhism, for instance, we say, get out of samsara as soon as possible for yourself, become an arahat and get rid of suffering and attain enlightenment as a follower of the teacher, the Buddha, and that's the end of it. That's the end of suffering, that's the end of rebirth. But of course, in the Mahayana schools of Buddhism, you find the bodhisattva ideal, that even though I can get out of suffering, I want to remain in samsara as long as it takes for all beings to be liberated from suffering, even to the last blade of grass. Now the Theravadins might say that is an impracticable proposition. When will that happen? But the Mahayanas might say, yes, but it is a very selfless and a higher ideal than just getting enlightened for oneself. So whatever it is, that is a sort of standing difference in the approach of Theravada and Mahayana Buddhism. But basically, the fact of dukkha or suffering we find those three characteristics, that is the opposite of the three opposites which I haven't mentioned yet of those delusions, namely the opposite of the idea that things are permanent. That is, Buddha says, all conditioned things are impermanent. Sabbe sankhara anicca. That's the Pali word for it. And then all things, all conditioned things, are a form of suffering or conflict or dukkha, that is the word, unsatisfactory. So all conditioned things are unsatisfactory. Sabbe sankhara dukkha. So that satisfactoriness or the happiness which we projected through our delusion onto things, which are actually not having that quality, they can't give us, let's say, satisfaction forever, that's why it is called unsatisfactory. So that is the fact, and the delusion is thinking that it is giving real happiness. Then the third one is called anatta, which we just discussed, and that is the opposite of the idea of atta, or self, or soul, or eternal, unchanging core. So that is where, and then the Buddha said, that's interesting when you look at it in the Pali language, sabbe sankhara anicca, all conditioned things are impermanent. Then all conditioned things are a form of unsatisfactoriness. But then the third time he doesn't say all conditioned things, he said all things are anatta. That means the conditioned as well as the unconditioned. So the relative reality and even nirvana is also non-self. It doesn't belong to me, it's not me, mine, my own, or myself, or my soul. And therefore, that grasping and clinging to even the unconditioned is sort of prevented in that way. So that subtle attachment to even nirvana may also be given up. The complete freedom from attachment. Well, maybe we are a long way away, but that is the sort of ideal, and if that happens, then one is a liberated person. So the the knowledge of those three delusions, even in, let's say, an intellectual level or theoretically, can help us to see the things more as they are. But wisdom, which we call prajna in Sanskrit and Pali, wisdom comes in different ways. Sometimes in the time of the Buddha there were some followers who understood his teachings immediately, just by listening. And they got enlightened on the spot. And for instance, Kondanya, one of the first 5 followers of the Buddha, was one of those who immediately understood, without thinking about it, without meditating about it, without questioning, he understood, and he became free from greed, hatred, and delusion. And he became an arhat right away. But most people, most individuals, need to sort of think about it, and maybe discuss it, ask questions, and then within themselves contemplate on these characteristics, and then maybe meditate, and then realize. And that is probably the majority. And then there are also people who may hear the teachings, they may think about it, they may meditate, they may discuss, and they never realize. There are also people like that. So probably, since you are very interested in the teachings, you are of the second category. So neither immediately grasping, if we would have grasped it at the time of the Buddha, if we would have been alive at that time, we wouldn't be sitting here, maybe. Unless we were Mahayani's, of course. That could be. So, and otherwise, to discuss things and to clarify things through investigation of the Dharma within oneself or between people or with the teacher and with the texts also, and through your own meditation, that is a very good way of getting more deeply into it. But still, that is also a kind of intellectual level. The discussion, the thinking is not yet called insight or realization. And that is where we need this vipassana through the practice of mindfulness. Because then you see it for yourself. That is called self-realization. And that is not at the intellectual level, it's not a theoretical level, not conceptual, it is direct. It's like, aha, is that what anicca means, or impermanence? And even then you may experience it at different levels at different times, depending on your progress in meditation. So to put vipassana also in a more clear framework, in place within Buddhism, I would say that there are different kinds of meditation, as most of you are aware of, shamatha and vipassana. Tranquility meditation on the one hand, and vipassana or insight meditation on the other hand. So there are lots of different techniques which lead to tranquility. There may be more techniques actually leading to tranquility than there is vipassana. Vipassana is sort of standing by itself. All other types of meditation, I would think, even if you look at the traditional texts in the Theravada Buddhist texts, for instance, the commentary of the 5th century by Buddhaghosa, he had this path of purification, or Visuddhimagga, in which he explained many, many different types of meditation techniques, and 39 of them were of the shamatha type, and only one was vipassana. So you can imagine, for instance, what we do as practice of recollecting the qualities of the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. There are stanzas for that in Pali, there are also in Chonka, well, Thailand also uses Pali, yeah, and Tibetan. So the Mahayana schools seem to have translated everything to their local languages, whereas Sri Lanka, Thailand, Laos, Cambodia, Burma, Myanmar, yes, and parts of eastern part of Bangladesh and parts of India and Nepal, they remained traditional with the Pali texts. But so when you recollect the qualities of the Buddha and the Dharma and the Sangha, that is a kind of tranquility meditation. If you meditate on loving kindness, which we call metta bhavana, that is a kind of tranquility meditation. When you repeat a mantra, that is a kind of tranquility meditation. When you focus on an object, external object, or even an internal object, and try to exclude other objects, and you get into that concentration, that is also tranquility meditation. So, what I used to like is the saying of Sri Krishnamurti, whom I used to listen to quite a lot. He says, when you exclude other objects and you focus your mind on one particular object, you may get peace of mind, but that is not real peace of mind, it's just a piece of the mind. If you see the difference. Because you are focused on one thing, and that is then a kind of conditioned state of mind that you're in. So as long as that concentration is there, you may feel peaceful, but when that's gone, that concentration, you're back to square one. Whereas with the Vipassana meditation leads to, hopefully, and it should, lead to the uprooting of the negativities in our minds, such as greed, hatred, and delusion. So that is the difference, that little by little, you may not notice it immediately, but little by little, it tends to uproot our delusions and therefore our greed and hatred. So our attraction, repulsion, and jealousies and things like that, getting upset about things, that sort of diminishes because of the insights. And therefore it is considered a path to liberation, whereas the tranquility meditations are temporary solutions to the problem. A temporary escape from suffering and getting into tranquility, maybe a nice state of mind, but it is actually the Buddha just before his enlightenment who realized that his teachers who had been teaching him tranquility meditation were leading him only up to a certain point. Very deep and very high, what they call the Ashtasamapatti, that is the 8th level of tranquility, like in the formless spheres, the jhanic meditation, but still he felt there must be something beyond this all. This is still conditioned. So let me sit down and find out, and for myself he actually discovered that there is this really unconditioned state. So that is basically what the Buddha discovered and then started teaching it. And he said you can do tranquility meditation, but it is in a way limited in its goals. But it is good as a preliminary. Like it's good to start quietening your mind before you start doing the direct vipassana. But that's why we usually start with something that helps to tranquilize our minds. But not to keep it in a tranquilized state, but then to wake up to the fact of body, feeling, mind, and its characteristics. And that way, we really have a combination of samatha and vipassana. But in that book which I mentioned, the Visuddhimagga, or the path of purification, it is also mentioned that there are two ways. Some people go through tranquility and deep levels of tranquility to vipassana, others go directly to vipassana. That is called dry vipassana, sukha vipassana. And in that sukha vipassana, you don't really try to get into these jhanic states of deep absorption or deep concentration or one-pointedness of mind, but up to a certain level that is called excess concentration. Upachara dhyana is called. And excess concentration you can recognize when you get, for instance, some signs within your own mind, maybe a little light or a circle of silver color or golden color or white or something within your third eye which indicates that your meditation is progressing. But that is not really a sign of enlightenment or anything, but just a sign that you're getting into this deeper level of concentration. But not yet into the jhanic levels, but just before. And that level seems to be enough, according to Buddhaghosa, to see those characteristics of anicca, dukkha and anatta clear enough to help you realize the reality. So, especially I think in case of people who are involved in daily life, in your work, in your family, in your daily life situations, you can't expect your mind to just be fully concentrated on one object immediately. As soon as you sit down and you try to focus on one object, then you start noticing how your mind goes all over the place. Because you are involved, isn't it, with your work and with the things that you have to do, things you have to remember, and so on. So, and all the impressions that you get during the day. So if you have only like 30 minutes or 45 minutes for meditation per day, let's suppose you do, then you won't be able to get into deep levels of tranquility meditation. So I would say the more practical form of meditation would be just a little bit of tranquility and then mindfulness, dry vipassana, being aware of what is actually happening in your body, your feelings, your mind, and the sense impressions that come to you, that may be sounds or other kind of things that happen within you, thoughts. So these are kind of objects, as they are called, the four foundations of mindfulness, Chatur Satipatthanas, the four foundations of mindfulness. The body, for instance, you can be aware of the fact that you're sitting. That is a very good start, just to know I'm sitting here. Or you feel your body sitting there. That will really zoom in your mindfulness into the present moment. When you experientially feel your body sitting here, not just thinking I'm sitting here, but you feel the body sitting here. Then there's no room for your mind to go back and forth. You're sitting here. Then, more subtly, you can start focusing on your breathing. That is also something that we can only experience in the present moment. You can't feel your previous breath, nor can you feel your next breath, but you really can feel only this particular breath and this particular part of the breath which is touching now. So when you have that in your focus, then you know I'm really aware in the present moment. Now, but that doesn't last very long, because other things may call your attention. Your mind may go back to thoughts about the past or about the future, or just daydreaming. Then we should not get worried about the fact that the mind is wandering like that, but just to notice it and to be aware that there is this thinking going on now. And when you realize this is just thought, without identifying with it as, me, mine, my own, or as real, but just as thinking, you can also use a technique which is called labeling. You put a little label, thinking, thinking, thinking. Then you realize, I'm thinking. So you get above it, you get out of it. And then you can let go of those thoughts. Whereas if you identify with it, it is something like in the night when you are dreaming, and if you have a nightmare, for instance, you identify with that, and you wake up sweating and afraid, and suddenly you realize, it was only a dream. And as soon as you notice that it's a dream, it's gone. So similarly, during the daytime, we also have times that we are daydreaming. When you're meditating, also your mind may drift away and think about this and that and the other. But when you pay attention to it, and you realize it is just thinking, then already you are aware of what is happening. And then you can let go of those thoughts if they're not needed. And I could almost guarantee you It's not like no good money back, but I can almost guarantee you that 97.5% of all the thoughts that come to your mind are unnecessary at this moment. You know, when you have to do something, then of course you have to think. But when you're focusing on your meditation and you have reserved that time for it, then probably most of those thoughts you can keep for later. Then maybe you need them. And some of those thoughts, or a lot of those thoughts, may just come from, you don't know where, from some subconscious or from the past, or some motivated by hope and fear or regrets or whatever. But we don't really need them in our practical sitting at that moment. So when you just label it as thinking, 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 then already you are sort of half out of it. So that makes it about half an hour. And I think we've covered quite a gamut of topics relating to these three characteristics and the three delusions, and also the technique of meditation. So perhaps it's a good idea to actually start our practice part of the evening. And I would say just remain where you are, and maybe if you're too close to each other, just make room a little bit. And let me see, could you reach for the camera, please?